Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a project update video for this 1/6 scale radio-controlled Armortek Russian T34 85 medium tank. In the last video, I mentioned lots of new detail accessories that were designed and were getting ready for installation on this model over here, and where I went to great detail on their features and details and all that. But in this video here, we're going to be installing them to the model. And as you can see, the model is basically almost ready for painting, with the exception of one or two little fittings that are to be added. But either way, there's going to be a lot of really cool content coming at you, so stay tuned. Kicking the video off takes us to the toolboxes, and they are ready for installation. So the first thing that I did was I temporarily removed the fuel cans, because obviously I need to get in here, and with the cans in the way, it becomes a bit cumbersome. And the next thing I need to do is to mark the appropriate locations to mount on the fasteners, which most of the time seems pretty straightforward. You line something up, you take a pencil, and you mark the locations. However, with these ones here, because of the standoffs, you're not exactly going to be able to get a pencil in there in order to do the marking. So instead, what I'm utilizing is this pick over here. I found it in the toolbox, and this is going to be used to scrape the paint where the holes need to go. The advantage about this is that it's long and skinny. It fits perfectly here into the holes that are found on the bracket, and because it's nice and sharp, I could go ahead and scratch the paint where the holes need to be. Once the paint is scratched and scraped away, I can then go ahead, remove the toolbox, and I'll have the perfect locations to drill the holes. When you're doing it, you want to make sure that the toolbox is exactly where you want it, and also that it's positioned nice and evenly onto the plate over here, so that the piece doesn't move or wobble on you when you're doing the scribing. Obviously, that could throw off the holes. So I went ahead and did it off screen. I basically just was holding it, and I just basically just stuck it in this area here and just did a little wiggling just so it could scratch the paint. With the piece removed, hopefully the holes or the indentations come out right here on camera. There's one, there's the other, and here go the other two. And from here I could go ahead and carefully drill these out with the drill with the proper drill bit. In fact, no point loiter on it. Let me go ahead and make some chips. And here's the toolbox now fastened in place onto the tank's tin work, along with the grousers, but I'll get to that in a moment. So here you can see what the piece looks like fitted. The piece is fastened in place with those brass fasteners, as I was mentioning before. And with the use of fasteners and not glues, this thing here is essentially mounted on the same way it is on the real one. Takes us to the grousers. As you can see, they fit into their little cubbies very, very well. And the only thing that's going to be needed to finish these off are some straps that are going to go ahead and tie these things down via the tie downs that we have found on the tin work and the vehicle itself. But this will be done, of course, at the tail end of the build when everything is basically painted and is almost ready to go. Before I could do anything on the hatch, the first thing I need to do is plug up these holes. Like I mentioned before, on the Armortek kit, with the way the tooling is designed, we have these two big cutouts in these two sections over here in order to plug on the original kit supplied hinge. Since those are no longer going to be relevant, the holes need to be plugged up. And here you can see the 3D inserts now added in place. The pieces did fit on, but I had to do a little bit of hand fitting on them, which is a little weird because I literally just traced the opening in order to go ahead and make the CAD file, but here we are. So I was able to just carefully remove some material with a Dremel with a high-speed removal bit, and the pieces just dropped into the appropriate locations. Now that they are in place, I'm not done yet. I do have to do some body work on these two sections over here to make sure everything is nice and smooth, and I'm going to go ahead and take care of that with the use of some typical bodywork procedures, namely the use of the glazing ice, which is the auto body product I've used on several other of these builds. And the advantage about that one is that it dries very, very quickly. So within like an hour or so, I should have the body work here taken care of. On the reverse side of the model, you get to see the other two toolboxes now fitted in place. These are again held in place with the same fasteners that I was referencing before. And they, again, do a marvelous job of keeping everything in place. This now takes us to the saw. The saw has been mounted in place, and you get to see what it looks like fitted to the vehicle. In order to fit this in place, again, you have to carefully mark 3 locations. With a Sharpie, you drill them out, and the mounting rail just drops right into place. You also get to see those locking lugs that I was referencing before, mounted on either side here of the piece, and you really get to see how everything is held in place, and it holds in place extremely well. The latch, first the bottom portion of the holster keeps the saw section nice and protected. These 2 little finger sections here do a good job in preventing the piece from falling backward, and the other 2 little lugs that I just referenced keep it from moving in a lateral motion. As you can see, if this thing is going over really rough terrain, this is basically the amount of movement you're going to get, and this thing isn't going anywhere. The one thing I do want to mention as a update is you'll notice that the handles have been shortened compared to the one in the previous scene. This one here is actually more to scale, and when I was looking at it, I realized that when I started mounting it to the vehicle, the longer wooden handle over here was actually making contact with the rail, and obviously that was causing a problem. So went ahead, looked at some photos of the real ones, crunched some numbers, and I went ahead and shortened them. And this here is the size of the production units. Or I should say, this is the size that the production units will be. To shorten them wasn't too much work. I just marked it with a Sharpie, cut the piece off, and just turned it down on the lathe to make it nice and smooth. The only thing that's needed now to finish this side of the vehicle is the siren and the searchlight, which will be getting fitted right over here. However, this is going to be done after we take care of the bow hatch. One other thing to mention is that with these details fitted in place, guess what? This side of the tank is done. Finished, ready to go. So it looks like there's a lot of things being crossed off that proverbial to-do list. As I mentioned before, with the putty fully set, it's now time to do the body work. This is going to be taken care of with the palm sander with some sandpaper. I'm just going to go over this area over here, which will do a fantastic job with flattening this stuff out as much as possible. If there are any sort of imperfections or divots, this too is going to be addressed, but I'll tackle that when the time does come. At this point here, I'm going to mask up, get the thing powered up, and I'm going to go ahead and sand down the rest of the material. As you can see, I also went ahead and taped up these areas over here because this will definitely mitigate the amount of crap that gets thrown onto the inside of the vehicle, which is just going to be more work for me to vacuum up when the next step does come. So, that out of the way, time to mask up and get this thing started. Okay, so actually I switched sandpaper grits in between takes. This one here is much more aggressive and did a much quicker job with removing the bulk. I am going to switch back to the finer sandpaper, which is 120 grit. By the way, for those who are interested, this is 100 grit that I was using for this. So I'm going to switch back to the 120, polish it down a little bit further, and I'm more than likely going to have to do a little bit of hand sanding with some red spot primer, and that'll be then hand polished for a perfectly smooth surface. One thing that is holding up is my Hercules palm sander over here. I did mention this in my jumbo video, and this thing works like a champ. Love it, totally worth the money. Okay, that should just about do it. Let's see, run my finger over it. And I can feel a divot here and a divot here. That's good. Most of the bulk is removed. The rest can be done with some hand sanding. As for this guy here, he's okay. These guys are alright. Okay, let me go ahead and add a smear or two so I'm going to put in these spots. Alright, so nothing more to do. I'm just going to let this stuff dry and then pick up with the hand sanding. Actually, I think I could take off my mask now. Let's see. Yeah, okay. Okay, I feel so much better with the mask off. And you can hear me better. Okay, so in addition to the red putty, I also went ahead and chipped off some big chunks of oversmear that were in the hatch wall here. Obviously, those have to go. And I'm really glad I taped up this section over here because obviously there is a ton of pile of crap over here that is not inside the model. Well, nothing more to do then. Sit and let it dry. It's also at this time where I could finally install the exhaust manifolds. Yes, this is something I've mentioned in a couple previous videos, but now I can finally get everything finalized and inserted in place. In order to do so, you can see here that I went ahead and attached a latex surgical black tube to the inside portion here of the exhaust. The tube just plugs directly in. The only thing I use to keep it in is just a little bit of silicone right over there. Hopefully it comes in camera. And this, of course, will plug to the plumbing that's found right here on the inside. The way I'm going to do it is that each hole goes to a dedicated exhaust manifold. And this one here is the refueler, and this is going to come up probably around here where we have that access hatch on the top deck. Or I could go ahead and fish it through the slack grills on the rear section, but that remains to be seen. And after a short period of time, the tubes have been fixed to the tank permanently, and the plumbing has been attached as well. One thing I wanted to mention, the reason why I opted for using black surgical tubing is quite simply put, the black will not pop out through the grill work once fitted in place, and it has some better camouflage to help conceal everything, and just makes the tank look a little bit more prototypical. With that out of the way, it's now time to secure on the armor covers. Again, these are 3D printed, they're found on the ECA catalog, and I mentioned these in a previous video. With the exhaust tubes themselves fitted in place, it's now time to fit on the covers. As for the covers themselves, you'll notice that they have been primed, as well as the base coat has been added to the underside section. Obviously, the same was done to these guys over here, because for the same reasons, once these things are fitted in place, you're not exactly going to be able to get in here, so it's best to paint them beforehand. As for fitting them in place, well, these guys are going to just be slipped into their appropriate locations. I'm going to drill the sections out and use the fasteners that I do have offhand in order to complete the look and installation. The one thing that I noticed though is I do have to do a little bit of hand fitting over here because I am hitting a little bit of the weld beads found on the hinge that secures the top cover in place. And this is something I'm going to have to do a little bit of hand fitting on, but with the Dremel should make short work of it. Once that's done, I'd be able to fit the guy in place, mark the hole locations, drill them out with the drill, and then commence with the actual installation. And here are the two sections now with the holes drilled out, as you can see. Went ahead and carefully marked everything and drilled them out with the drill. Also, you'll notice that I went ahead and quickly just threw some paint on the two sections with a paintbrush. Not exactly a thorough paint job, but this again is a prelim coat, which is perfect because it gets what's underneath the unit fully covered, or covered enough so that it doesn't have any sort of bare material showing through, which is something that is pretty beneficial. I'm just going to wait for the paint to dry. Once it's set, I'll go ahead and throw the covers on, lickety-split. And at the end, this is what it looks like with the covers now fitted in place. As you can see, they just dropped right into the appropriate locations, and the holes were drilled out a little bit wider compared to the previous scene, just so that they better fit the new fasteners that were added. The fasteners are 3D printed, so they blend in with the remainder of the fasteners that you see here on the back, so it keeps it with its continuity. And as you can see here, this is truly a sight for sore eyes because this was literally the last thing needed to be added to the rear area over here to make it complete. And that's right, with the addition of these, guess what? The rear section of the model is totally 100% done. So, it feels so good to say that. Alright, so with that out of the way, it's now time to continue with the other accessories. And after that quick little bout of polishing, I think it feels very, very smooth, and this should do the trick. From here, I'm going to go ahead and vacuum all this crap up so I can go ahead, remove the mask, and then I can start with the mounting procedure for the bow hatch. After the sanding was done, to test everything, I went ahead and masked the area up and just hit it with a few shots of red primer spray paint just to see what the final outcome is, hopefully to prevent any sort of surprises when the thing actually goes into later paintwork. And I'm happy to say that it actually came out pretty well. The surface here is as smooth as I'm going to get, and once the next few layers of paint go on, it's going to blend in absolutely seamlessly. And with this now having the green light, this means I can now finally install on the driver's hatch. However, one thing I noticed after messing around with the fit is that I do have to make a slight modification to the tank. That was something that was unforeseen when I was designing the hatch. You see, this is something that can easily happen when you're designing a part, specifically an interior component, is a lot of times you may design something which will look perfect just like the real one. However, because of the way the model's designed, you may run into something that can cause an issue, and that's exactly what happened here with the bow hatch. With the camera off the tripod, this brings our attention right here to this mount that holds up the spring system for the front torsion bar, or swing arm. It's not a torsion bar, it's a spring system, but anyway, we have this bracket over here that secures the thing in place, and it does a great job. Unfortunately, it's not there on the real one, and why this is relevant is because on the hatch here with the interior detailing, the lever that we have right here, which is the detailing for the periscope, will actually strike this guy over here and prevent it from closing. And again, this is something that can easily happen when you're designing something, and next thing you know, you try it out in the real world, and oops, there's something that is in the way. Normally, this sucks when this happens. However, there is a way you can roll with the punch, and there's something I am going to make, or I should say a modification I'm going to make to this guy over here, that's going to allow the hatch to clear, and also allow the piece to function as it did before. And that is with this little line that you see right there. As you see, I drew a line on the piece there with a marker, and this is going to be some unneeded material that's going to be removed. I'm going to go in here with a Dremel with a cutting stone, amputate this section off, which will then allow the clearance for the detail piece to pop into place and open flawlessly. Or at least that's the idea. Before I could go ahead and make the incision, though, I went ahead and covered the inside portion up with a bag in order to mitigate as much as possible the filings that are going to be emitted from the cutting process. With that out of the way, I could go ahead and make the cut now. And after a few slicing and dicing with the Dremel, I was able to get the material removed so that the hatch can fit with all of its detailing and fit on flush. The material was removed, but it was removed in locations that do not affect the structural integrity of the part whatsoever, and this was a tricky little balancing act in order to pull off. The confines were extremely tight, a lot of particles were made, but fortunately they all vacuumed up pretty easily. With the way we have it here, I'm now ready to go ahead and install the hatch. Also, you'll see that where I went ahead and did the cutting, I also touched it up with a little bit of the red primer, just so it looks a little bit more polished and a bit more neat. On the top portion over here, you can see where I marked and drilled out the locations for the fasteners that are going to hold the hinge in place. And unlike the other sections on the model where I drilled and tapped, for these ones here, they're just drilled and they're going to be held on with a nut on the inside. For this application here, I feel that the nut is a stronger bond as it gives you much more rigidity. And for this hatch here, which is going to be open and closed fairly frequently, I think that would be a better choice. Also, one of these pieces is in aluminum, while the other piece is actually into the 3D printed insert, so the use of a nut is going to be recommended because, again, it gives you more structural integrity as opposed to just threading the piece in place. And without further ado, it's time to install the hatch. Here you can see the hatch, and since the previous video, I had to make some modifications to it in order to better fit into the hull over here. So the first thing I did was I actually amputated the support arm that came out of here, and originally that would be hooked up to a assist spring found on the inside of the real vehicle. Unfortunately, on the model over here, it was having a hard time fitting in place, specifically with the machinery on the inside, so I had to make the decision to amputate it off. The decision to amputate it was one that I really was tough to make, but because the piece is not really that visible to begin with, it's more or less something that's found on the inside of the vehicle, it was something that was a sacrifice that was worth it. The other thing I had to make was with the decision of the functional bits here, and this was something I alluded to in the other video, where I said that the pieces are functional, but the problem with making them functional is that they'll actually work, in that they'll secure and lock the hatch closed on the vehicle. And unfortunately, you need to be a 1/6 scale person to go ahead, climb on the inside, and to open it. So I had to go ahead and lock everything in this static position. The piece of me was just screaming while doing so, but it had to be done. This was done to the two locking levers right here and here, but also to the spring mechanism, which on the last video was actually fully functional. And the piece I designed literally perfectly, where when I was testing it, it actually went clink and locked directly in place. So I'm happy that I was able to get that to work. Unfortunately, for pragmatic reasons, it had to have been revised. And to do that, I went ahead, took the piece out, removed the spring, and glued the plunger here permanently in the closed state. I hated doing it, but again, for pragmatism, it had to have been done. The front hatch is going to be very important because this is where the recharge system is going to be found, and also, more likely, the power switch is probably going to be located in this section too. So the hatch having to open and close is one that's going to be very important, and with that in mind, I had to go ahead and forego the really cool feature of the locking system. Either way, that's now taken care of. The unit at this point here is ready for installation. So, as I mentioned before, the holes have been drilled out. I already have the fasteners offhand. I'm going to go ahead, pop this thing in place, bolt it on, and cut back to when this guy now is living on the vehicle. And here's the hatch now finally added in place, and as you can see, the front of the tank is essentially complete. There is one more bit of detailing that I do need to add. It goes up here. I'll be mentioning that in the next video because I have to do some slight hand fitting to this area as well as doing some welded sculpt, but either way, you get a good idea that the front section is just about there. The hatch sits perfectly on the deck itself, or on the front armor plate, and it opens absolutely perfectly. You get to appreciate all of that nice detailing that I went ahead and designed for this piece. And also, it opens up to the point where you have ample access to yank out the power cord to charge the thing. And again, this is more likely where the power switch is going to live so that you can turn the beast on and actually drive it. When you're done, the hatch is closed into the closed state, and you're good to go. The last thing I need to do to the hatch is some body work, where I need to plug up these two holes over here where the fasteners are so that everything blends in, much along the lines like the rear axis hatch that I mentioned a few videos back. And it's going to be going through the exact same procedure, same steps no less. The other thing I want to mention is the splash guard right over here. This was that 3D printed one that was also mentioned in the previous video, carefully marked, and I just attached it to the model. This is held on at the moment with adhesives. Like I mentioned with the Bow MG, this thing here is not exactly in a snag prone location, so in my opinion, the use of fasteners isn't really necessary. However, if something does happen where I bump into it and it pops off, perhaps I'll go ahead and revisit that. But for the time being, this thing is so low profile, I don't have a problem with it being held on with adhesives at this time. Either way, the front is definitely looking awesome, and it's just really materializing into a beautiful rendition of a T34. Also at this time here, I went ahead and removed the slack grill that I fabricated in a couple videos earlier, and I went ahead and thoroughly primed and painted it. At this point here, it can be installed to the model. This needed to have been primed and painted before the remainder of the paintwork, because obviously in this location you don't want to get crap on the inside, so it's best to go ahead and thoroughly do that before the model progresses to that point. But either way, now that the piece is in one solid color, now that it's in one solid color, it really looks fantastic. And again, it's one of those pieces of equipment that I really emphasize that the model really did need, and then after I fabricated it, it definitely makes the model shine. So let me just go ahead and just get this guy ready for install. Oh, no, it's this way. There we go. As we can recall, this is just held in place with some fasteners. And two should just keep it down for now. As the build comes closer to the end, I will flesh it out with the appropriate number of fasteners, but that's something that's going to be more than likely coming in the next video. At this point here, the section of grill work can be closed off, and like I mentioned in the other video, this is just held in place simply with these little pins that we have right here and here. Or, no, I think this one goes on the opposite side. Yeah, this one goes on the opposite side. Slide this bad boy in. There we go. I had to slide him, by the way, before to install the toolbox. So, there we go. Perfect. Ready to roll. And with the rear deck and the cover back in place, you really get to appreciate the last-minute detailing that was added to the rear engine deck area, or I should say the exhaust plate area, in order to flesh it out. With the exhaust manifolds and their covers in place, the rear dissection, like I mentioned before, is all done and is actually ready for painting. And it is kind of cool to see it right now with all of the various different accessories that were added to really get a good idea on exactly what was added to this area over here to really spice it up. Of course, once everything is painted and is in a single shade of color, it's going to look fantastic. And on the front portion of the model, it's really looking great. We're really coming to the end with this area over here. The only thing I stated before, we got to do the bodywork as well as add that one little piece of detailing. And after that, the front section is ready for painting as well. The last bit of detailing that I mentioned in the previous video that's not being installed on this video over here is the siren and the headlight. This is something I'm going to be going over in more depth in the next video, along with the last of the front fittings, because for the headlight, I'm in the process of soldering together the LED system and the other equipment that goes along with it, and if I was going to add that in this video, it would have made it a little over bloated. So it's best to go ahead and pace myself and have that in the next video, which will be posted shortly after this video here makes its debut. It's not going to be the next video, but it'll definitely more likely be the following video. Either way, stay tuned because this project here, like I stated before, and as you can clearly see, is really coming to the end. And rapidly, I might add. And with that, that wraps up this project update video for this 1/6 scale radio-controlled Armortek Russian T34 85 medium tank. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel where it's a great way to keep up to date on new posted content, being more 1/6 scale project update videos like this one here, or the other smaller scale model showcase videos that frequently get posted to this channel. Another way to keep in loop of new posted content is by liking us on Facebook, where I have more photographs of this particular build that have been posted since the project start, as well as photographs of all the other larger and smaller scale builds that have been seen on this channel. Furthermore, don't forget to swing by EastCoastArmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thanks again. I'll be seeing you all again on the next one. Till then.